Welcome to Coin Talk. We've done no prep because this is a Q&A thing, so I hope you have some good questions. We're going to talk about repairing coin-op video games. I think we're going to open by just telling some good arcade repair horror stories, seeing as how we're so close to Halloween and I love a good train wreck. Probably my favorite repair, I got an asteroids machine and it had some video collapse. So I started digging in the monitor, thinking I was going to recap it and do all that stuff. And what I found was a nightmare. So what had happened was the interconnect headers for the deflection transistors, all the solder had cracked, so it wasn't making a good connection. And instead of taking 30 seconds to resolder them, the person instead did the easy fix, which was they took a paper clip and they cut it with wire clippers and they shoved it into the connector so that it made better contact. And then that didn't work quite reliably enough, and so they took zip ties and chained it up so it was pressing in just exactly the right way that the signal was getting through. So I opened it up and it's just like this zip tied monstrosity. That was a pretty good thing. So I fixed that one up right. That's one of my favorite horror stories. What do you got, Brandon?
I did that. That was me.
You are the zip tie master. You love zip tying your PCBs to the cabinet.
Yeah. That's my horror story. I don't have anything prepared, but I'll think of something.
Me neither.
Yeah. I have a horror story that I did by myself, which is usually the worst kind. When I first started seriously collecting about 5 years ago, the first game I got was Gyrus, and there's a high score save kit you can put into that. So, because originally Gyrus didn't save high scores. So, being new to soldering and doing this kind of stuff, I just dove in and put it in, and all of a sudden it stopped working. So that's like the worst of working on these games, is that you're trying to do something to improve them and they end up getting worse. But I was able to program with a logic probe, first time I'd used one of those, and found that I'd lifted a trace and was able to jumper some wires in order to get it working. So the horror story has a happy ending, and now high scores are saved.
Excellent. I have another one. I was working on an asteroids board and someone said, yeah, it has RAM issues. And so I looked at it and they had tried to replace some of the RAM ICs themselves and had not done a great job of it, and had just burnt all the pads off the board, lifted traces. It was a huge mess. They had one RAM error, and instead of replacing the one RAM that was bad, they said, oh, well, if one's bad, I'll just replace all of them. So every trace was just ruined. And it took me a couple hours of just rebuilding all of the traces by hand, socketing them and putting in new traces. So the moral of this story is don't replace stuff like that if you can't solder, and also don't replace parts that you haven't tested as bad. If that one test is bad. With caps, I think maybe they were thinking, like with capacitors, if one is bad, probably the rest of them are pretty close, but it doesn't really hold with ICs, so don't do that. Who has questions? Tell me about your game repair nightmares.
Yeah, I had a question as far as a JAMA connector. I've seen, some are JAMA, and then some are 44 pin and 22 pin.
Sure.
For the Atari, right? And I was trying to, one of them didn't have too many pins, so I was trying to populate it with some extra pins, or take out pins that I didn't want. And so I've seen a kind of jam a screwdriver in there there's some metal clips in the back, right? So you push it down in there and that pushes in the clips, and then you're able to pull it out or push it through.
Yes.
And so I was able to take them out, but when I went to put them back in, they're all floppy in there. They don't lay right in to the side. And then I heard somebody say that, well, some connectors you can take them out, put them back in, and some you cannot. And so.
Well, you can take them out and put them back in. Will they stay in? That's the question.
Yeah, they're all floppy and they don't get connected.
Yeah, there's a little metal tab that pops up that springs in there, and all that old metal has lost its springiness. And so when you put that screwdriver in order to bend it down to get it back, instead of it springing back up, it stayed down. So take that screwdriver and pry it up a little bit more, and then stick it back in there, and it should stay.
Yeah.
Or just recrimp it at this point, because you're...
Those, yeah, you can do that if you have the pins. Those split edge connector pins are difficult to find because they're no longer in production.
Right.
So if you can reuse them, you should. Yeah, I would just bend that clip up and go that way.
Is there a big difference between those JAMA connectors you get from China for like $10 and the ones you get from like Bob Roberts or something like that?
Bob Roberts buys from China.
Yeah. Well, you're not getting anything from Bob Roberts these days because he's retired.
Oh.
The only new connectors you can get these days are the solder connector ones. They suck. They're not good. They're very poor quality connectors. So they're the only thing you can get, but they're low quality. And if you can find the Molex split pins, those are the best. But they're hard to come by these days.
Yeah, I found some new old stock 44 pin for a centipede.
Mm-hmm. Like a EDAC.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And so the old connector had like burnt, and
Yep.
I think it was on the ground.
Yes. The power rails on those are very prone to burning.
Right. So I was going to replace that edge connector, and so I figured, well, I'll just clip the wires and then resolder them onto this new old stock 44 pin connector.
Yeah, that's no fun.
And I had another question as far as
Does anyone else have a question?
yeah, sorry. One more, and then as far as it was all burnt where the ground is on the connector.
On the PCB, on the card edge?
Yeah, on the PCB itself. And I've seen some where you take like some copper
Yes.
tape. And is it better to use? I've heard different opinions whether you use one that's like single-side adhesive and then just kind of put it over there and then solder it to the trace.
Yeah.
Or should you not use adhesive sided at all and just get plain copper and then epoxy it to the board?
It depends on what you're repairing. For those power lines, they're connected in the same position on the top and the bottom side of the board.
Right.
So what I generally do is I use the adhesive and I wrap it around. But the adhesive isn't particularly strong. You should really be epoxying it either way.
Right.
If it's one of the connectors that isn't the same line on the top and the bottom, then you have to go with epoxy cut to fit.
Thank you.
Cool. You went back.
So question, a lot of chips that are in these games are either becoming rare or no longer being made.
Yep.
In your mind, what's the best source or some of the really good sources that that you've experienced where you can get those? And which chips would you start to hoard or put in stock because you know they're going to be rare in the future? Or
So-
already rare now?
Yeah. Any of you guys want to jump in?
I don't know, I was reading on Cloth not too long ago, and that's the, I don't know if you guys know that, it's the arcade forum. A lot of those collectors visit and spam, contribute.
Most overpriced games on.
Yeah, post overpriced games. But there was a thread not too long ago that listed the common failed TTL chips, and so I stocked up on those. But I don't know, eBay for TTL chips. I just go on. I think Unicorn Electronics is a good site because they don't have insane markup and they have a lot of the older stuff. Maybe the non-LS stuff I would stock up on because a lot of the popular vendors are just discontinuing those and they're kind of pointless to carry for the larger vendors now. So that's probably what I would recommend.
Yeah, I would say most of the TTLs are dirt common and you can get them anywhere. So there are some oddballs like the Atari Vectors use 74 670s, which are like little stack counters for the vector generator. I would definitely grab a bunch of those if you could. Any of the old RAMs are getting harder to come by, so the 2114s, 4164s, if you get a lot of those, I would just hang on to them. The other ones that are somewhat hard to find are the DACs that you use, DAC 08 on the Cinematronics and some Ataris, and the 8561s. Those aren't in production, but there's There are some Chinese bootlegs made of them with fake date codes, and I've had pretty good luck with the 561s from China. It's really, if you find a good supplier in China, you can get some decent deals, but a lot of what they sell are remarked chips or counterfeits. So buy a couple and see how they work out before you go, spend a few $100 on them and demand a return if they don't work. So I would definitely say RAMs for sure. Those are getting hard to find. Any of the custom chips, I mean, you're not going to have a source for those, so you're just going to have to hoard PCBs that have them and try to hang on to those. Some of the more popular customs have reproductions, like the Atari AVG chip. There's a number of reproduction options for those, so I'm not super worried about that. Yeah, the Namco customs, some of those are also reproduced, but any of those are going to be harder to come by just because they made them in such lower quantity than the standard TTLs. Who else has a question? Yeah.
Is there a workaround for the slapstick security chips on, particularly the Atari system or system on the system too?
I don't know.
There was a guy in Europe that was working on a slapstick solution for like the System 1, like Marble Madness and Indiana Jones, and also for System 2 stuff like Sprint and Paperboy and all those stuff. Yeah. And I thought he was selling them for a while. There's a thread out there.
I
I
remember
just searched
seeing
it
a
up.
blog thread about some of that.
So I don't think there was a huge demand because it's, well, maybe there is for Marble Madness and Indiana Jones, I guess. But yeah, he was selling them for a while. I think he maybe discovered some bugs and maybe stopped selling them.
Yeah, I don't have any of those games, so that's not something I'm super familiar with.
What's a slapstick solution?
Slapstick is, I'm making this up, it's a custom Atari IC.
Yeah, security chip.
Yeah.
So,
Gotcha.
quit you from doing ROM swaps because they sold those System 1 and 2 games as daughter cards. So probably to prevent operators from just swapping ROMs, they sold them the whole card and security chip. So.
Yes, gentleman in front in the red shirt.
I've got an asteroids machine, actually. The display, it stops coming up, and I just kind of get wisps of things on the screen. Where should I start in debugging that one?
That game was sold as is, so
I would turn up the brightness and see if you have a problem in your Z amplifier or in the XY amplifiers. One of the failure modes I've seen on those monitors is, so I'll give you a little background on this. The vector monitors have an X and a Y axis and they deflect freely along that. And for whatever reason, the voltages that they use to do that are it swings negative for the left-hand side and positive for the right-hand side, and the same for the up and down. And if you have 0 volts exactly, that means right in the center of the screen. And also, their intensity line is 0 to 5 volts, but 0 volts is full intensity and 5 volts is fully extinguished. So if you have a board issue and it outputs no video, suddenly you have the brightest spot you can make right in the center of the monitor. And if you've ever seen an asteroids or any of those black and white vectors where they have a hole burned straight through the phosphor right in the center of the screen, that's why. So they added a spot killer circuit which would detect that and turn off the beam so it would stop destroying tubes. And what that does is it samples the deflection that's happening, so how much the beam is being moved around, and it compares it to a threshold, and if it's too low, then it turns off all the brightness so that it won't burn. It didn't work super great, based on the number of tubes out there you see with the spot in the center. But as that capacitor dries out, the threshold will change, and so even though it's drawing the whole screen, it will turn the brightness completely off, and it'll kind of fade in and out in different areas. So if you crank the brightness up, you'll be able to see exactly where it's deflecting, and that'll give you an idea of if your problem is in the deflection circuits or in the Z intensity circuit. So I would start by doing that and probably recapping the monitor. If you have an oscilloscope or some other vector display, hook that up and that'll tell you if the issue is on your PCB or on your monitor. This is a real common troubleshooting technique where you say, I don't know what the state of this system is, and so I'm going to swap in something where I know what the state is, and I'll see, does the symptom stay there or does it go away? And that tells you, is the part that I swapped out where the problem lies, or is the part that's remaining where the problem lies? So if you have something you don't know what the issue is, we have scrambled display, for example, swap in another monitor, and then if you still have a scrambled display, you know it's something that is in the cabinet. And if it looks good, then you know it was the monitor you took out. So just a real common troubleshooting technique. If you have a way of doing that, I would definitely recommend it. Anyone else have questions? Or do we have more horror stories?
Hi.
Aiden? Yeah.
I'd like to know if you guys have any horror stories about being electrocuted or like fires that have started.
Yeah.
Oh, I got you. I got you.
Fire electrocution.
Well, I've done both. Let's see, all involved working with monitors, surprisingly. So I was working on a Geo 7, had a blown F901, I think, fuse. And what happens, so there are these two big filter capacitors that take your B+, which is like, 120 volts, and they filter that out from the unregulated or the choppy DC to the smooth DC. When that fuse blows, they don't discharge, they just hold that voltage. So as you're pulling that chassis out, if two of those terminals scrape on the bottom of the frame, then pop, it discharges 120 volts right there and probably right into your hand. Done that a couple times. Got a few frames with a big chunk of metal taken out of it where it vaporized from doing that. Whoops. I also did once set a monitor on fire. I bought this monitor and I knew it was broken and I just got a good price and figured I could fix it. It was a black and white vector and I had it shipped to me, which is kind of crazy. It was $50 shipped, but I said, all right. And then after I bought it, after I shipped it, the guy was like, yeah, let me know if you fix that because I worked on it and some other guy worked on it. We had no idea. We think it's not fixable. I was like, great. You could have told me that before I paid you. So I get it and I just pull out the deflection board and all the solder was cold. So I just resoldered everything. I was like, oh, easy fix. Resoldered it all, put it back in, turned it on, and it instantly caught on fire.
Yes.
So, and the issue was they had been
Astro's machine.
Yeah. They had taken the deflection amp transistors and they had taken them out and they swapped their positions. And also they replaced like a 2 amp fuse with an 8 amp fuse. So instead of amplifying the current and sending it through the yoke, it amplified it and sent it straight back into the PCB, where the fuse was overrated and just a resistor immediately caught fire. So double check that worked when you're working on something that you haven't tested before. And the thing is, I had plugged it in before and it was completely dead. But because the solder was all cracked, no power was getting through there. So it wasn't until after I pulled it and fixed that problem that it caught on fire right in my face.
Did you fix it?
I did, I got it running perfectly. And then I sold the machine. You never know.
To Chris. That was your answer, Royce.
Yeah,
Do you guys work with like convergence at all?
yeah.
Okay. Like, I don't have a signal generator, so I was thinking, oh, that'd be cool if I could hook it up to my PC and just create a grid or something like that. And reaching around, I got a couple calories and reaching around to that, I gotta be really careful.
Yeah.
Well, you need to take the monitor out. You can't do it
Yeah.
in the cabinet.
Yeah, I got it better than a lot of the, but I still, like, I'm kind of a perfectionist, so like, there's little things that I notice that other people won't.
Yeah.
But I know, like, the wedges, how does that work? The wedges?
Sure. So, does everyone understand what convergence is? Raise your hand if you understand convergence. Okay. So on a color monitor, there are 3 guns, one which generates the red color, one that generates the green color, and one that generates the blue. And they're lined up in a row in the neck of the tube, which means that if they're both firing directly forward, they're not hitting the same spot. So convergence is angling them in so that when they hit the face of the tube, they're right on top of each other. Otherwise, you won't get clear white, because clear white is all 3 at the hitting the exact same spot. And you'll notice on tubes with poor convergence, typically it's right around the edges when this happens. then you'll see kind of a blue or a red shadow on one or the other side of white text, like for a score. So convergence is adjusting it to hit exactly the right spot to get out the face of the tube. So you have to get your static convergence done first. Static convergence, there's a set of rings, magnetic rings that go on the yoke, on the neck of the tube. Static convergence is convergence right in the center. When the beam is static, it's not being moved around the screen. So you have to get that first. If you don't get that nailed, you'll never get the rest of it. Dynamic convergence, you have to adjust by reaching in when the monitor is on and adjusting the position of the yoke forwards and backwards and tilting it left and right. So those rubber wedges, if you look in the K7000 manual, it has a really great breakdown of the procedure for replacing the tube. And that's what I use when I've done it, and I've had real good results. So I would recommend you look at that. But those rubber wedges, you get the yoke in the right position relative to the face of the tube, front to back, and then you get your crosshatch up so you can see your convergence in the corners, and you tilt it up and down and left and right. And those rubber wedges, you stick under there so that it stays in that position. So you get it just right up to down, and you put wedges in there so it doesn't move. And then you do it side to side, and you kind of slide them in and out so that they're riding up, the yoke is riding up on a particular point there, so you can get it fixed exactly in place.
Are you wearing rubber gloves at this time?
I wear my wife's dish gloves.
Okay.
That's a joke. That's completely a joke because someone made a YouTube video where he dropped a tube and did that, and
Oh, really?
we made fun of him relentlessly. Just grab the plastic piece of it.
Plastic, okay.
All the wire is insulated because if it wasn't, it would be shorting to each other
Right.
into the different windings. So it should be safe, but I ain't gonna test it.
Yeah. And if you don't want to spring for a pattern generator, just get an old JAMA PCB, like Tetris or whatever is a pretty popular one. And pull the monitor out, rig it up to a JAMA setup, and just use that JAMA PCB as the test pattern.
Okay.
Yeah, it used to be, Tetris was real popular because it has good video patterns, but they're like $100 anymore to get your hands on one. So if you have one, that's great, but yeah, any old PCB, if you can get a crosshatch. I wouldn't recommend using a PC because you're gonna have to down convert that in order to get your 15K signal anyways. Yeah. You had a question?
Yeah, it's relating to that.
The dishwasher gloves or the?
No, the 15K signal. What if you have a VGA monitor, like I think it was in a Golden Tee, or maybe like a Silver Strike Bowling?
I think those are VGA.
Yeah, those are, because those ran PCs.
Yeah, but I think they have some kind of converter that or maybe they're multi-sync.
They could be multi-pricing.
But as far as if you do get a 25 monitor, is there any easy way to test that other than getting a signal? Do those, like a crappy mix signal generator, do they have the medium res on there as well?
Yeah, 25 hertz.
Okay.
Is it 25?
24.
24.
Yeah, 24. Those are, is that pretty much the only solution, or is that what most people use for testing those?
I'd say it's the most common in the arcade community.
Yeah.
I use an old Wicco pattern generator.
Yeah, the vintage stuff is hard to come by for that, so the Crafty Mech seems to be the most popular one these days. If you can get your hands on a vintage one, those are awesome, but they're quite a bit bulkier and often have to run off of line power instead of battery. So there are trade-offs each way,
But it looks cool.
it does look cool. Yeah.
Got a lunar lander.
No.
With a Geo 5 802.
801, I think.
802.
Oh,
Yeah.
right?
I've got high voltage, I've got filament, I can hear deflection. It's not the board set, I swapped it out in another machine, so we'll move that out. Power supply. Oftentimes I miss the obvious.
If you turn the brightness up.
That's sweet.
A lot of times I miss the obvious.
Have you plugged it in?
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, try your brightness and contrast controls and see if you can hear the deflection, then, and you have high voltage, you should get a picture. So you have, could be the connector for the intensity has come out of the connector for the monitor. So maybe it's getting the X and Y, but no Z signal. Could be your brightness and contrast are maladjusted. It could be that it needs new caps. I would check all of those things, but you should be able, if you have high voltage, you should be able to, and deflection, you should be able to crank your brightness, just crank it all the way up and see an image. So I would start there.
Yeah, I've been working on a V2000, or a 19V2000 in a mega race, and I've been lazy lately, and I've just removed the spot killer LED. So are you getting, is the spot killer coming on then?
Just one power out, next ones.
And then,
And that's normal.
yeah, so that can, if you can't see anything on the screen, but you hear the chatter, if you remove that LED, sometimes it'll generate an image and you can see what's going on. Usually it's, be collapse or whatever.
What color does the neck glow?
Proper.
Orange? Okay. Do you have a rejuvenator?
Yes.
Have you put the rejuvenator on the tube and made sure you have good emission?
No.
I would do that. There's those black and white monitors, generally black and white tubes are very, very resilient, much more so than color tubes, and will take a rejuve really well. And a really crappy looking black and white tube will look brand new with a rejuve, except if it's made by Amprex. The Amprex black and white tubes, there is some manufacturing issue with those, and they never worked as well. And these days, a lot of them are very dim, they have very poor emission, and there's nothing you can do to fix it. So see if it's an Amprex manufactured tube, and if so, it's very likely that your tube is just shot and you need a new one. You can get new ones still.
I found one.
Yeah, I put brand new ones in all of my black and white Vector minis. So you could do that, but I would make sure that that's your problem before you go spending $200 or whatever it ends up being on a new tube. They do look great though. Yes, the young lady up front. Do I have any more horror stories? Man, I was saving the one about setting the monitor on fire. I'm not sure I have another good horror story right now. I guess I was working on a board recently and I pulled out one of the proms. This was on an Atari auxiliary board, a math box, and I pulled out the proms to test them and I put it in backwards. Yes. So that, it got really hot. Really hot. I pulled it again and I tested it and it was okay, but make sure you put your chips in the right way, folks. Yeah.
What's your opinion on official recreation of old games, like the new Medieval Madness, for example?
Remember, there are children present.
I guess I have to leave. I think it's cool. I think that Williams obviously doesn't see the return, so they're just sticking with slot machines, but they see a little bit there to license it out, and that's really cool. What I don't like is that instead of just sticking with the old school PCBs that are easy to repair, that are, not SMD stuff, basically, they just threw it all on one PCB instead of having, tons of wiring and sockets. It's just all the LEDs in the playfield are just giant boards, and they're just all SMD LEDs just soldered to the PCBs. Some people swear by that the flipping mechanics is different and it just doesn't feel the same. I also don't like the recreated DMD art because I think it looks hideous. But from far away it looks cool because not the DMD art, but the cabinets themselves. I think they did a good job reproing those.
Yeah.
I'd rather have a smelly old 30-year-old pinball though.
Yeah. For me personally, it's all about having the original, so it's not for me, but obviously there's demand there, and it's, it's going to satisfy some of that demand without making, Medieval Madness and Attack from Mars games that are worth 15K, 20K, then I think that's fine. Make it easier for me to get what I want, easier for other people to get what they want. It's all good. I think my main beef with Attack from Mars is that it's overlit. I mean, you step up to that thing and you're just blinded because it is so bright. I think they went way over the top with the lighting. I don't like that. But, I mean, I have no problem with it. It's not the same thing. It's not the same market. Right?
Yeah, I think as far as recreations go, I mean, the reason we're up here talking about repairing games that are 30 plus years old is that we like to keep things original, and even though it's cool that those are being produced nowadays, I think all three of us would always want something that was original and keep it as original as possible, as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, and I also agree that the new DMDs don't look very good. The original ones.
It's HD.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I picked up a Video 5 cocktail table. So
Yeah, Pong Clone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was one of these deals where it had been sitting in a garage for 10, 15 years or whatever, right? But it looks great, far back. And monitor works, it was dim and gray and quadrupling the image. And so started poking around the board a little bit. There is, I think somebody recreated a schematic for it.
Nice.
So was able to find a couple of pins that seemed stuck on. Replaced a few ICs and no change at all on the screen. So recapped the monitor and it looked brand new again. It was nice and sharp.
Yeah.
And was able to just mess with a few pots, do some adjustments, and got it to just doubling the image.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't tweak it any further than that. So kind of stuck at where do I start looking from here?
So your doubling image could be, well, it's probably a PCB issue, but you should try and rule that out. The nice thing about those black and whites is that they give you a composite, well, it's not really composite because it's not color, but they give you a signal that you can plug into the composite input on anything that accepts that, and you'll get a picture. So if you have a TV or a small monitor, anything that takes composite, I would go pull the plug off the back and jump those wires into another display, just so you can rule out it being the monitor. If it is the PCB, there's this book called the Handbook of Digital Game Logic, I think is the title. It's from the 1970s, and it is a really great course on how TTL-based games work. It's really fascinating, and it's very, very cool. And all of that stuff is, it's just generated on the fly by gates, by logic gates on the board. And just figuring out exactly how you do that with counters and gates and OR gates is really, it's very fascinating. I'm very interested in that. So I would look through that, but it's all just based on counters and then the offset from one count to another. So it sounds to me like one of your counters is I would say your pixel clock. So that's the counter that shifts data out to the display. The pixel clock is tied to the 1/2 pixel clock because they divide it all into sections. So there's on the vertical output, there's 1H that fires every raster, 2H is every other raster, 4H is every fourth raster, and then the same thing for the horizontal. 1V is your pixel clock, 2V is every other. So it sounds like your 1 and 2V might be tied together. But go read through that book because it'll just give you the overview of in general, how does all this stuff work? How did they build it? And it's really great. I mean, I can't recommend it enough.
What's the title?
It's the Handbook of Digital Video Game Logic. I'll look it up and tell you the right title after the panel. I'm pretty sure that's the one. That's a cool game though. I like those. Yeah.
Do you have any tips on, not necessarily restoring side art, but preventing side art from being further damaged from where it is? I've got a Back to the Future pin that the art on the side, the paint's just flaking off, and how do I stop that from getting worse over time?
Don't touch it.
Okay.
Just don't ever look at it again.
I don't know if this is a common thing for pinball side art, but I know for back glass type stuff that gets delaminated, it's real common to get some Krylon triple thick and put a clear coat on back, and it'll keep that from flaking further. It might work on your side art too, but you're going to be, stuck with it like that unless you strip it all down and get a reproduction. So it's up to you if you want to do that, but I would say that's probably the direction you want to go. Mostly, I don't care if my games look terrible as long as they play right. Mostly.
Is it screened on or is it vinyl?
Not sure. Not sure. I think it's screened on because it looks like the paint.
Yeah, I mean, all you can do is, I would get a good paint match to the flaking stuff and just, dab it on lightly and see if you could wipe it off if it doesn't match good. And then, you clear the whole cabinet afterwards to protect it, or before, you start screwing with it. But a lot of people just do subtle touch-ups on it and then call it good and leave the stuff that would just be too much of a hassle. I mean, keeping it original is pretty good. Good patina.
Yeah.
I have a question kind of relating to that. Is there a good app for like scanning the color on something and matching it, or do you just like take a little bit and flake it off and take it over to the paint store and say, hey, can we match this?
Yeah. I've heard people stripping the cabinets and wheeling them into Home Depot and Lowe's, and then just having the paint department scan it.
I thought about doing that.
That's pretty common.
Because I had an empty cabinet, and I was just like, well, maybe we should do the paint first, because I could just take the whole thing over there and have them match it. And then if you do like retouch something, is there any good way to make it look older or not, maybe just because I put this part, that it's the same color, but it looks new. It doesn't match at all. You just like kind of distress it or whatever they call it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you'd probably go with a flat or matte sheen, because if you do satin or gloss, then it's going to look way off. And then also spraying it versus, maybe even airbrushing it.
Yeah.
Because if you do a roller or brush, then it's going to be, it's going to look too nice.
Yeah, just get that cabinet on a hand truck and scrape it against the wall a couple times.
How about, I got a joust cabinet, and I didn't know what it was because it had been painted over right, so I took some rubbing alcohol and a magic eraser pad,
Yeah.
and just started going at it, and I was like, oh, okay, joust, And so I was like, that was a lot of work to get an area this big. I'm like, all right, how am I going to do this whole thing,
The same way? Yeah.
That's what I've been doing. I got one side done that way, and it's just like, oh, okay, I'm getting bursitis here.
Just
Do
take
you
long
have
breaks in
children?
between it.
Do you have children?
They're gone.
Oh,
They're gone.
Bring it back.
Unfortunately.
You can just make them do.
Yeah, I get the neighbor kids or something and pay them like $1.
Yeah.
I told you one day that you have to help me when you grow up, so you're working on this cabinet. Yeah, I did a whole pole position cockpit that was painted black.
Yeah.
I did Magic Eraser, 91%, IPA,
Yeah.
and I just went at it for days.
How about like this, they have something called like the safest stripper or something? Or
Citrus strip?
It's not citrus strip, it's something, that's like a 3M product that says like, it's supposed to be the safest or least, and not damage the undercoat, but
Yeah.
I'm afraid to try it. Maybe I'll just try it on just a brown part or something on the outside.
Yeah, try it on the corner first.
Yeah.
Maybe the bottom,
Yeah, because
that
I've
corner.
seen one video on YouTube where the guy, I think it was citrus strip, he just poured it all over, and it came out pretty good. It didn't munch the undercoat,
Is that the guy with the dishwasher gloves? Or? Yeah. I've done citrus strip as well, and I do like a small, I don't know, quarter size or more, maybe like a dollar bill size,
Yeah.
and I'll let it sit on there for like 5 minutes, and then I'll take a brush and I'll just work it up a little bit, and if it starts to break down the paint, I usually just wipe it away. and then kind of just do little experiments, you know, with elapsed time and see how much you can agitate it. Because if it's really thin paint and you just cover it with citrus strip and you don't eat lunch, then your game's gone. So I would be careful about doing that depending on what title it is. I mean, Joust, they have stencils for it, but
That's like the original, you know.
yeah, the lacquer paint they use on that, I mean, is very, very, it's good. I mean, it sticks on there, so I would just go the IPA and Magic Eraser route and just take your time on it. Do a couple sections a day. What's the rush? I mean, it's been sitting there.
You know, most likely the original paint is gonna look better, like you said. If you have parts that are new paint, it looks new. And I mean, even though it's gonna look really great, if you do stencil the side art brand new, it is gonna look brand new. So depending on whether you wanted to have some patina to it, it's, you know, the good thing about that paint most likely is that it's gonna have protected the stencil. So it'll probably look pretty good if you know, take your time on it.
Yeah, the antique radio guys have this thing they call over-restored, where someone has just put too much work into it, it's too shiny, it doesn't look like it's supposed to. And I see a lot of that, definitely in the pinball and arcade communities, where stuff doesn't look right because it's too perfect. Like a lot of those Midway cabinets, if you look at those, I mean, they rushed those out and really half-assed a lot of stuff. And you know, like Pac-Man or Wizard of War cabinet, they have overspray all over the cabinet. You know, it's just speckled with paint because they were painting the one next to it, and it's sprayed all over the place. And you see people who do restorations, and it's perfect. It doesn't look right. That's over-restored. So I like to try and keep stuff pretty close to original. If you're gonna put in the time to restore it, then I think it should look like it should look. And I have a correction. It's the textbook of video game logic, Volume 1, and you can get that on ArcArc if you're not familiar with that. That's a big mirror of arcade-related documentation. arcarc.xmission.com. It's a really great resource. Lots and lots of documentation and good stuff in there. Okay, we got our 5-minute warning. Who has questions or horror stories? Does anyone out there have a horror story? A recap gone wrong? I actually, yeah.
I got this one asteroid machine.
I'm afraid to talk because it was an asteroid.
He's heckling because he bought an asteroids from this guy.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
It's good. I replaced the transistors and thought the old insulators were
The mica
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I recommend the Sil Pad.
I got those now.
Yeah.
But I did that, and then I thought, oh, well, the other ones had this base on them.
Yeah.
I have some PC thermal
Oops.
bases. And that makes smoke.
Yeah.
So,
You used the silver kind, not the white kind.
yeah. So, got it all right, got the pad, cleaned it up. It was like something's not right.
Yeah. That's if you're.
It started spazzing after it worked for a while, and then I could smell it.
Yeah. They make two kinds of thermal paste. One has metal in it and conducts electricity. The other does not. Do not use the conductive kind where you should not, because that'll happen. Let's see, I do have one more. I recapped a Nintendo power supply for my Donkey Kong, and I put in one cap backwards, and I powered it up, and that sucker, now I'm glad that power supply was in a cage, because it pumped and pinged around in the cage, and smelled really bad for a long time. So, yeah, double check your work. And yeah, especially if you're doing a G07, because one of the cap positions on there is screened backwards. So you gotta, whenever you're recapping something, look at the orientation it was in, put it back the same way, and just be aware. On that G07, there's one where it's screened backwards. If you put it in the way it says to on the board, it won't work.
What was that? What?
arcarc.xmission.com. That's a really great resource, lots of stuff. I have a whole copy of it offline, just in case. You never know. But yeah, they've been around for years and have a lot of like RGVAC era stuff. Like, I guess there was some point where people decided it would be a good idea to replace black and white vector monitors with color vectors because there were more colors than black and whites. You wouldn't want to do that now, but there's an act to make asteroids run in color on a color vector. All sorts of weird and amazing stuff there. Who else has a question? Anyone? Any last questions on this spooky thing? Nope. Okay. Well, we have only 1 minute left. So thank you all for coming to Point Talk. And oh, we have another question.
Sure, yeah.
Oh my God.
How do you talk your wife into getting like one more
I'm
arcade
divorced.
game in the Right next to him.
He's also divorced.
Yeah. How do you get that
You
one
don't.
arcade game in the room?
Have an understanding wife.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming. Another one? You can ask me afterwards. You yes, come. Our autograph line is out front. So,
Where do you source 19-inch CRTs?
off the curb.
Off the curb.
Yeah, Goodwill. Yeah. Thanks.
Also, we have a podcast called The Coin Rejects. If you're interested in one of the stickers, we try to publish monthly-ish, so wherever you get your fine podcasts, we're available on there. Us three and one other gentleman talk about games and stuff like this, so if you're interested, give us a listen.